Good evening and welcome to the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, where every month is Black History Month and any day is a good day to make connections between the past and the present. My name is Novella Ford and I'm the Associate Director for Public Programs and Exhibitions. Tonight we tip our collective hats to the genius of Scott Joplin, the king of ragtime. He was born in 1967 or 1867 or 1868. We've been through this before with Langston Hughes, who we now all know is a year older. But we join in the celebration of the 150th anniversary of the birth of Scott Joplin that's being celebrated throughout this year as well as next. According to Reginald Robinson's bio, he became interested in ragtime in the 7th grade when a city-funded arts program gave an assembly with a live jazz ensemble called From Bach to Bebop. In the middle of the assembly, the group played a sample of Scott Joplin's The Entertainer. Robinson decided this was the kind of music he wanted to play. What I love about this simple story is the power of music older than anything we can remember in our own lifetime, still influencing the aspirations of a then 7th grader. Stories like this also remind us of the need for arts in schools, but that's another soapbox for another day. Robinson is joined by Tyehimba Jess, a poet of ambitious forms and rhythmic prose. He is the author of Lead Belly and the Pulitzer Prize-winning Olio, described as, give it up for that. Tyehimba Jess, he is the author of Lead Belly and the Pulitzer Prize-winning Olio, described as weaving sonnet, song, and narrative to examine the lives of mostly unrecorded African-American performers directly before and after the Civil War up to World War I. Olio was a collection 7 years in the making and worth the wait. We are pleased to have them both on this stage this evening to teach us about Joplin and the importance of ragtime even to today's music forms. Tonight is also made possible by the support of Farah Jasmine Griffin, who's the director of the Institute for Research in African American Studies at Columbia University. Griffin was not able to join us this evening, but shared these remarks. We are pleased to partner with the Schomburg in presenting this program on Scott Joplin, one of our most significant artists and composers. When Tyehimba Jess approached us, we immediately agreed because of our deep respect for him. We are honored to bring him and Mr. Robinson to Harlem. I'm so sorry that another previously scheduled engagement will prevent me from joining you for what is sure to be a remarkable evening of conversation, poetry, and music, and I echo that tonight will be a remarkable evening of conversation, poetry, and music. So we'll get to the music in 2 seconds, but first you need to silence your cell phones and also turn off the flash on your camera. With that said, I'm going to remind you all that following the musical presentation and poetry and conversation, we will have audience Q&A. So if there are things that piqued your interest or questions that you have 2 of the best scholars and performers and writers here today who could possibly answer your question. Robinson will also have CDs available after the program, and he'll be signing them and taking conversation in the Langston Hughes lobby following this program. With that said, please welcome Reginald Robinson on piano and Tyehimba Jess.
Triple R, Reginald R. Robinson. I am so glad to have Reginald in this house today. He's been my secret collaborator for almost a dozen years now. As I met Reginald at a ragtime festival in Missouri in around 2007. And I went specifically to this Blind Boon Ragtime Festival to meet this man because I wanted to meet a brother that was playing some ragtime and was keeping it alive. And when I met him, it was as an occasion of such a generous spirit, somebody who was such an incredible ability, and also the openness really to listen to the ideas that I had when I was researching ragtime and floating around in the 21st century, but also researching in the 19th. So the conversation that we're going to have today is a little bit of a snippet of the kind of conversation that I would have with Reginald over the phone.
Yeah.
when I would be talking about some of the characters that are in Olio, and then many of the characters that surrounded Olio, many of the historical issues and events that accompany Scott Joplin. And this is the 150th anniversary of Scott Joplin, who used to live pretty much around the corner from here, right? On 132nd or 100, I can't remember the exact address. But around Scott Joplin, the music he created, and the world of ragtime and its introduction to jazz. So, Reginald, the piece you just played was the Maple Leaf Rag.
Yeah, Maple Leaf.
And that sprang from the Maple Leaf Club.
That's right.
Can you tell us about the Maple Leaf Club?
Well, what I do know of the Maple Leaf Club, that it was a social club in Sedalia, Missouri, which is the town that the piece was published in. I guess it was a social club for musicians and people who just, wanted their nights out, entertainment or whatever. And I don't know if I'm correct, it was sort of like a union as well for musicians. Sort of like the Black 400 Club, which was another club down the street. Same street, just like a couple blocks down. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm going to read a little excerpt, because that kind of conversation, I'm going to read a little excerpt from...
Okay. But I will tell you, too, that
Go ahead.
I think the club may have come after the ragtime piece. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, I think Maple Leaf Rag Scott Joplin was working on that piece about 1888 or 89. Yeah.
Okay.
And it was published 10 years later, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, what the kind of histories he's talking about, this is how it kind of snuck into what I was writing. So this is an interview between a character who I invented, who was based off of a guy named, I have his book right here, James M. Trotter, but who wrote a book called Music and Some Highly Musical People.
Oh, okay.
Who was an ethnomusicological treatise written by a freed slave back in, I can't remember the exact year. But there's a character who is conversating with Blind Boon, who's another great ragtime piano player, and it goes like this. For starters, Mr. Boon, how did you meet Mr. Joplin? Ha! Yes. We met in the middle of a storm. He was scheming to take my money, but he was going to have to play that piano like I'd never heard if he was going to walk away with $1,000 cash. Man walked in on a July 4th concert in Sedalia, 97. It had been thundering all that day, storming enough outside to the point where we almost called the concert off. Had to take it from the park to inside the old 400 Club, where all the colored swells would meet. If you wanted to get a nice crowd, that was the place to be. So the rain was a bit of luck for me because it pushed them all inside to pay their money and listen to the music. I guess Joplin thought it'd be a little bit of luck for him, too. That's a little excerpt, right? Because I was thinking about the 400 Club and and the Maple Leaf Club.
Yeah, you know they actually had a rivalry as well.
Yes.
Those clubs.
It was a musical rivalry?
It was I don't know, it's like, I don't know, reading, looking at the old newspapers from then, I guess they were sort of like, the clubs were bands, and they were also like, I don't know, they had, I guess, different views on things, and they clashed.
Right.
There's this one instance where Arthur Marshall was in the middle of it, who was another musician who I would like to go into talking about in a minute, but he's the two clubs fought. It's like they were like a gang or something,
So we're talking two rival clubs in Sedalia, Missouri.
Yeah.
Which was a really happening town back in the 1880s. Really, you're talking about like the edge of the western frontier, so to speak, right?
Yeah. So they clashed. Yeah, these two clubs clashed, and Arthur Marshall was right in the middle of it. I think he was about 18 years old at the time.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And I want to, if you can pull the slide up of the music, the photographs, if I can. See what's after here. Well, Scott Joplin, of course. And
there he is.
Arthur Marshall. This is who I'm talking about. He was in the Maple Leaf Club.
Now, Arthur Marshall was older or younger than?
He was younger. He was much younger than Scott Joplin. He was about, on that photograph, he was about 18 years old. Mm-hmm. And that's from this cover. If you look at the lower right, the photograph, the same photograph,
And this is the Swipesy.
Swipesy Cakewalk, yeah. And I don't know if was there something else you were mentioning before I would have.
No, I want to hear some Swipesy.
Well, Arthur Marshall tells a story in 1959. He came back to Sedalia. He was living in Kansas City at the time. And he comes back to Sedalia for this special concert. And he talks about how at the time, like in the 1890s, Scott Joplin was going to the George R. Smith College for music. And he was Scott Joplin was staying with Arthur Marshall and his family. And they had this old square grand piano that he would play on, Arthur Marshall would play on, and Scott Joplin heard this tune that I'm going to play for you, the Swipesy Cakewalk. But he heard parts of it, and he was like, oh, wow, play that again. Play that again. This is what Arthur Marshall, the story he told. He said, so he played it again, and he kept playing it, and that's how we began to get together, and we wrote this song. And he said how it became to be known as Swipesy Cakewalk. Well, he said they were standing in John Stark's music publishing office, which you see John Stark's, he was the publisher of the piece, and in Sedalia, and they heard two little newspaper boys out in the streets got into a confrontation, and so they looked out and saw these two boys fighting, and they happened to look up. John Stark happened to look up and said that, he said, look at that boy's stealing that other boy's papers. So that's where the Swipesy came from.
Swiped his paper.
Yeah, he swiped his paper. So the kid that's on the front here, he's the one, I guess, who stole the papers.
No joke.
That's why he's smiling, seriously. And something I noticed in the tune, this tune was published in 1900. So while Maple Leaf Rag was being published, this tune was being worked on. So it was published the following year, 1900. And the second theme, I noticed something about the second theme. It almost sounds like his character sounds like he's laughing. Yeah, it sounds kind of devious. Anyway, I play Swipesy Cakewalk, as much of it as I can play. Scott Joplin, Arthur Marshall wrote the first half of it, the first two themes, and Scott Joplin wrote the second half of it, which is kind of complicated. So. Thank you.
You know, one thing I wanted to ask you about is syncopation. Whenever you read about ragtime, when you read articles about ragtime back in the day, the main thing they're talking about is syncopation, 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 as like the sound of it was new for the American ear at the time. I wonder if you could kind of break down for me, for one thing, a little bit about the history of ragtime migrating from the banjo to the piano, and what that idea of syncopation, why it was so original at that time.
Well, the ragtime music had, as Scott Joplin said, had been around ever since, these are his words, 1913, ever since the Negro was in this country, we've had ragtime music. He said that it is just, in fact, I wish I could, should I read from here?
Please.
These are his words in 1913. In fact, he was talking about, because the American Federation of Music kind of outlawed his music. It said it was, the American Federation of Music said his music, it was crazy. They said that if you listen to ragtime, the syncopations repeatedly, it can cause brain damage. It's ridiculous. It really, what it was like, it was discrimination. This was black folks' music, and they was trying to, the music industry, which was controlled, by whites at the time, were trying to keep the music down like they did. All the music we did afterwards, and I don't want to go down the rabbit hole, but I just say that music that came after ragtime. You hear this, the same thing. It's bad, it's the devil's music. The blues came along, it's the devil's music. Jazz came along, it's the devil's music. Rock and roll came along, it's the devil, rhythm and blues, it's the devil's music. Hip hop, it's the devil's music. They didn't say it like that, but it just said it's not real music, nowadays. But anyway, Scott Joplin, these are his words in 1913, April 3rd of 1913. He says, I have often sat in theaters and listened to beautiful ragtime melodies set to almost vulgar words as a song. And I have wondered why some composers will continue to make the public hate ragtime melodies, because the melodies are set to such bad words. Mm-hmm. I've often heard people say after they had heard a ragtime song, I like the music, but I don't like the words. Mm-hmm. And most people who say they do not like ragtime have reference to the words and not the music. Mm-hmm. If someone were to put vulgar words to a strain of one of Beethoven's beautiful symphonies, people will begin saying, I don't like Beethoven's symphonies. So it is the unwholesome words and not the ragtime melodies that many people hate. Ragtime rhythm, this is important, this part. Ragtime rhythm is a syncopation original with the colored people, though many of them are ashamed of it, but the other races throughout the world are learning to write and make use of ragtime melodies. It is the rage in England today. When composers put decent words to ragtime melodies, there will be very little kicking from the public about ragtime. There's been ragtime music in America ever since the Negro race has been here, but white people took no notice of it until about 20 years ago. And he's referring, this is 1913, so he's referring to 20 years before, which was 1893, the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago. And so that's when the music was first introduced to the world, but it had already been here. Black people who had already playing ragtime music. And I heard this one recording from 1972 where a musician who I had a chance to speak to just briefly, named Bob Wright, had located some syncopated music from Mali, from Timbuktu, in the 10th dynasty. Huh. Yeah, and he played it on the piano on this ragtime piece. And it is like, wow, you know what I mean? It's ancient. The rhythm is ancient, So
what is for clarity?
Yes.
You were backstage. You were talking about that lack of syncopation, and what was that?
Lack of syncopation would be like this. I'll play a popular tune that everybody knows by Scott Joplin, but I'll take out the syncopation. No syncopation. No, it's no. That's the syncopation. The syncopation is it's an anticipated rhythm. It usually anticipates on the upbeat. So the syncopation would be. So yeah, yeah. So that's.
Thank you for that example.
Should I talk about what makes ragtime music ragtime, or should I?
Yes.
Well,
please do.
Should I go on to? Oh, can you?
We got a lot of slides to show you.
Oh, this is, yeah. I'm glad. I didn't know if this slide was here. Now, this guy name was Ben Harney, and Ben Harney was he didn't predate Scott Joplin, but he was around. He made a name for himself before Scott Joplin made a name for himself, and he made a piece called "You've Been a Good Old Wagon," and he made so many other popular songs, ragtime songs. And he billed himself as the king of ragtime. And this is before Scott Joplin's king of ragtime. But Ben Harney had a book published in Chicago called Ben Harney's Ragtime Instructor. And the reason why I'm talking about Ben Harney is because this is the ragtime before Scott Joplin. And so Scott Joplin's ragtime was very sophisticated. But this is the way ragtime sounded before Maple Leaf Rag and pieces like that were published by Joplin. Not to say Scott Joplin wasn't around; he was around, but music hadn't started having an impact on the world at the time. This is a piece called, let's see, I think that's it, yeah. Plantation Echoes. It was in this book that was published in 1897 in Chicago by the Thompson Music Company. And Ben Harney, a lot of people thought that he was black musicians thought he was a black musician, right? U.B. Blake thought he was black, that he was passing. That's what he said. He said he was black. He was passing for white, right? And I think James P. Johnson thought he was a black. Yeah, thought he was a black musician passing for white. But Ernest Hogan, who was way back, went back further. Ernest Hogan knew him personally. Knew Ben Harney. Said he was not a black musician. He was a white musician who had a very good Negro singing voice. Is how he put it. Yeah. So
reverse passing?
Yeah, that's right. So this is a piece that was in this book. This was like a book to show how to play this new complicated popular music that was coming in called ragtime. This is a piece called Plantation Echoes. And just the title alone tells you that his title was the King of Ragtime, and he said that he's the inventor of ragtime. That's what he said. Ben Harney said he invented ragtime. Yeah. But how can you have a book that says, in your book you have a tune called Plantation Echoes?
Right.
Okay, so it's showing where the music came from. He didn't invent it. So anyway, Plantation Echoes from 1897. That's so.
So it was evolving from that to Scott.
To Scott Joplin, yeah.
Right.
So you can hear the difference in
Right.
sound. Scott Joplin's Maple Leaf Rag is like. It's at another level. I mean,
Right.
It was like
Right. Yeah.
very, very, very.
Definitely hear that.
Yeah,
hear
it's
that.
Like, it's like
evolution.
Beethoven. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
So, but I want to mention too that the tune that I played is in this book. It's not by Ben Harney. It's, the tune is actually by a guy named Theodore Northrup, whose name he's the guy who did the arrangements for that Plantation Echoes. And he was a white musician who was about. I was told he was about 60 years old, or in his 60s when that was published. 60 in 1897. Yep.
Huh. Okay. Now we have some other pictures here. And
Oh, I'm sorry. I kind of went along, but I can.
No, go ahead.
You just hear me. You can.
no, go ahead.
Oh, I was just. I don't want to go too far ahead. I just want to mention there was another writer at that time who was coming up in the 1900s named Louis Chauvin.
Yeah.
And his good friend Sam Patterson talked about him, remembered him in 1948 or 49. He talked about Louis Chauvin, who was I guess what they call there a Creole. His father was Indian, Mexican, and his mother was African American. And Louis Chauvin was from St. Louis, Missouri. He was a young musician. He was like about Arthur Marshall's age, around the same age, born about 1880, 81. But he was this amazing musician who was another like protege of Scott. Everybody was like Arthur Marshall said. He said we all served him as sort of like a daddy to us, all the musicians in Sedalia. Wherever he went, we used to just flock around him because he was so smart and he just had so many ideas that it was like way ahead from what the average musician was doing at that time. And Louis Chauvin was one of these musicians who was around Scott Joplin, but he had his own distinctive way of playing. And he was also known, he could not read, Louis Chauvin could not read music according to the story Sam Patterson told. He was strictly an ear player. But anything he heard, he could play back one time after hearing it, no matter how complicated it was. Yeah, and Sam Patterson said he actually played back a whole musical from memory after hearing it one time. Yep. But he was known as the king of ragtime pianists in St. Louis. And his ability could even outstrip that of people like Tom Turpin, Tom Turpin was the top player in St. Louis, but Louis Chauvin could put things, he could take Tom Turpin's tunes and put them in keys that Tom Turpin couldn't even handle. Yeah, because he didn't have any restrictions on what keys because he was self-taught. Yep.
So Heliotrope was played by Chauvin, and did Scott help him?
Yeah, I'll tell you a little bit about that. It's one of his many tunes. Louis Chauvin wrote pieces, and Sam Patterson tells a story. I wish I had his image. I didn't get a chance to bring Sam Patterson's image, but he was another one of these guys. He's like I guess they call him. I looked him up, and he's in his census it refers to him as a mulatto because he was very light skinned, and but Sam Patterson. What point was I on?
We're talking about Louis
Chauvin, right?
This is how our conversations
They
go in many different directions.
Yeah, he wrote so many tunes. Sam Patterson said he would wake up and write a tune. He'd be composing a song by midday. The first thing he would do was start an exercise, a John Philip Sousa march in double time, contrary motion. That's the way he put it. He said he was about 13 years old when he was doing this. This is about 1900, somewhere around, I think. And he said after that, he'll start composing this song. He'll compose a whole rag all the way through in one day. And the next day, he's forgotten it. And he's working on a new rag. But that's how he worked. He had these beautiful melodies, and they're all gone. So he only had 3 pieces published that's known. Heliotrope Bouquet was the last one, and that was published in New York here. And during the period when Scott Joplin was traveling, he had left Chicago to visit Louis Chauvin, who was dying from syphilis at the time. Louis Chauvin had only been there for like 6 months, so I don't think he was that active there. But this piece, Heliotrope Bouquet, I think it's from about, just stylistically, I think it's about 1904 or 1905, around that time. But Scott Joplin came to Chicago in 1906 and finished it. I'll play a little bit of it for you. The first half of it is Louis Chauvin, and the second half, I'll see if I can get through it. The second half is Scott Joplin. And the second theme I want to mention to you, for those who may not know, the second theme was used by Louis Armstrong in the 1920s is for a piece called Heebie Jeebies. Yeah. So it's to show you how far in advance Louis Chauvin was. These guys were like blues writers. They were like writing blues way back. So.
Wow.
A little bit of it, yeah.
I can feel that transition to Scott a little bit when you
you can hear that.
You kind of feel it.
Because he does that in a entertainer. Did you hear? Yeah, so.
Okay, so now I have to back up and ask on a personal level. Okay. You're born in the 70s, West Side Chicago. How did this happen? How did this happen? How did you wander into a music that was 100 years ahead of you and get so deeply involved in it? How did that happen?
I don't know. I was always a different type of kid. I was an artist at school. That was my first love was art, and I guess I was a nerd. You know, I was the kid that they bullied at school. I would stay to myself and I would draw, and you know that was my first love. So I already had an artistic mind, and about 1980, I'll say roughly 1984, 85. My second oldest
About
brother,
13.
Yeah, I was about 13. I was 12 around 85, and my brother started listening to all this big band music at home, and he had got into a fight with some kids at school, and he just wanted to be different because they would listen to rap. He still was listening to rap music, and I was listening to it too. You know, my other brothers were listening to it, but he wanted to do something different. He was so upset with these guys. They put him in the office, and he was about to be suspended. So while he was in the office, these little old ladies were sitting there listening. You know, they worked in the office, and they had this music playing, and it was like I think it was like Tommy Dorsey or one of these guys, Artie Shaw, somebody, you know, right. Benny Goodman, and one of them, you know, and he asked them about what's that? That's what he asked them. What's that? And they said, oh, this is from our time. This is what we call swing music, and so he was curious about it. So he brought that music home, found out what radio station they were listening to, and started listening to old time radio classics. So he was listening to all this, you know, Fibber McGee and Molly and George Burns and all that, you know, all that stuff. And but in between, they would play these remote broadcasts from the different clubs. So you have live recordings of people like live performances of people like Tommy Dorsey, who became one of my favorites in the time. But that was my ear was beginning to get. And when he first brought it home, I was like, that's some old scratchy stuff. I don't want to hear that, you know.
Right.
And so I was into Michael Jackson. So, anyway, so I continued to hear him listen to this music, and he was listening to other music, Jimi Hendrix, and whatever. Whatever was popular, I should say, at the time. And so anyway, my ear I was starting to develop an ear for old music, and that was the beginning of it. And one day in 1986, we had an assembly at my school, and these guys came. It was about 5 musicians, these black musicians. And I was excited because I was like, I had been listening to this Benny Goodman music, and Tommy Dorsey, who was my favorite. His music was just beautiful. So I was excited about this brass. I wanted to see the brass, the gold, That's what I was thinking about. Like, man, we're going to have a live band coming to school. So anyway, they came and they did this show called From Bach to Bebop. And about the middle of the program, the MC mentioned this. He said, this next style is called ragtime. And he's not playing the piano, but there's a piano player in the band. So he plays this. I didn't know what the name of this song was. I just thought it was the Ice Cream Truck song, And I was like, wow, that's the Ice Cream Truck song. But and so automatically my attention went from thinking about just the big band music to now I said ragtime. He said, that's what ragtime is? I didn't know who Scott Joplin was yet. If he mentioned his name, I didn't hear it because the assembly was it was a disaster. Kids was talking loud, and it was like 3 rows like this, but it was like much wider, and it was just talking. And so, but I heard that name ragtime, and I heard this melody. So I had 2 things to go on: the melody that I remember from the Ice Cream Truck, and the name ragtime. So I wrote the name down, and that was the beginning of it. And I went and looked in the encyclopedia, and under ragtime, and it said for more information, see Scott Joplin. I'm like, honestly, I was like, who the hell is Scott Joplin? That's what I said to myself. And so I remember that day saying that and looking him up, and he said he was known as the king of ragtime writers. And he gave a list of about 5 tunes or so that he had wrote, and that in fact that his music had been used in a movie called The Sting. And so, now I recognize that. I know that movie. I heard of it, but I didn't care about The Sting. It was an old movie, from when I was a kid. And so anyway, now I had something to go on, but what attracted me to ragtime was the sound of it. It's this. It just sounds like it was more personal, it was more direct. The big band music was beautiful, but it had a lot of different things going on. Right. This was more direct, it was personal, and you didn't hear nothing, nobody talking, it was just... It just sounded sincere. And I liked it. I was like, wow, it sounds so genuine, so sincere, and yeah.
So tell me now, your lessons. You said how did you learn how to read music? How did you learn how to play this?
It was an uphill battle because my parents could not afford music lessons for me, and I was one of these kids who wanted it. I know people who had their parents paid for them to have music lessons, and they didn't want to study. And I'm like, your parents are paying for music lessons, study. I'm like, I wish I had that, I didn't have it. I didn't have an opportunity like that. So I guess it pushed me. I needed to be self-taught, I guess. I don't know. Because I don't know, maybe if I had been given lessons, I would have went somewhere else with the music. But it made it more of a struggle, more of an interest to me to learn. I was determined to learn how to play ragtime, especially after I heard the soundtrack for the Sting. When I heard Solace, which I don't play, I used to play it, but Solace, the beautiful Mexican serenade by Scott Joplin. After I heard that, I was like, wow, Scott Joplin wrote this piece. It was intimate, it was sincere. I had never heard anything so sincere like that, And I was like, wow, this man was really a great writer. He didn't just write the Entertainer, which I found out the name of the tune was called The Entertainer. But I said he wrote everything he wrote from his heart, So that's what, But anyway, learning to teach myself how to write the music, since I couldn't persuade my parents to get me music lessons, I took these 2 music books that we had at home. One was one of my older brother's high school music books that he wasn't using, and it's just laying around. And I took that book. I said, I'm gonna study this book. It's called The Rudiments of Music, And I took the book and started looking at just from the very beginning about the lines, the staves, the staff, the lines. It was 5 lines, and I remember teaching myself this 5 lines. I started writing 5 lines down, and I learned the treble clef, how to write the treble clef, and where the circle part, how it fit between the two, the E and the G, right? I think it's between let's see, it's between the E and the B, the middle line. And I figured that out and kept practicing it, writing it. And I kept quizzing myself, and I made charts. I found out about ledger lines, and so I just figured out that. But the thing that I could not figure out, even though I knew about what a whole note gets 2 counts, and a quarter note gets 1 count, and all that, I couldn't figure out how that sounded to the ear. I said, I'm seeing it. I know what it's saying on paper, but how does it sound to the ear? I'd like to hear how that sounds. So the way I did that was, I finally got a job at a music school, a neighborhood job, and it allowed for me to have 3 music lessons, at this place in Chicago, American Conservatory of Music, and they were coming to the end of their semester because for the winter break, and they only had 3 more weeks left. So the teacher was like, "Do you want to take these lessons, or you can come back afterward?" I was like, "No, I want to take these lessons now. I want to get these three lessons in." So it was 3 Saturdays. And my thing was to try to learn how to sight read, not to play, but I wanted him to teach me how to play ragtime. He couldn't. He said, "You already know how to do that." So anyway, he gave me all these things to take home, and I didn't use them for what he gave them to me for. He gave me these finger drills. I think it's called the Hannon exercises, finger drills, and all this. So anyway, I took that home, and I didn't look at the Hannon exercises for the finger drills. I never learned all those scales and stuff. But what I looked at was the accidentals. I said, "Oh, so this is how you do A flat. A flat is got 4 flats in it." Now, I figured out all the different keys, and so it didn't mean anything. To play in any key didn't matter to me. I didn't have anybody telling me you play in a key of C minor, C sharp minor is difficult. No, it's all difficult. C can be difficult as well, So anyway, the teacher, one of the great things he told me, he said, "Get there. There's a book on Scott Joplin's music on the next floor. Go down 1 floor down, and there's a music store." He said, "There's a complete book, Scott Joplin piano works." I said, "Oh, really?" I had never seen his music in print, So I got the book, and now I was able to look at the notes and listen to the music because I was going to the record store. And so now I had a reference for what the notes, how they sounded. So now I could see a quarter note and this is how it sounds on when you hear it. So I began to do that with my music. I was composing, started writing my music, and I started being able to use the quarter notes and 16th notes effectively, the right way. So that's how I learned how to write my music down. Yeah.
So thank you. That's amazing. And continuing in that vein, so you're composing ragtime in the 21st century.
Yeah.
So you're like a descendant of Scott, so to speak. Can we hear what that sounds like?
Yeah, let's see. There's a piece that
What's the name of this one?
This is one called the
Footloose?
Footloose, yeah. Okay. This is really stride, boogie, ragtime. It's a bunch of mixtures of these different styles together. And tell you real quick, there's a guy named Blind Leroy Garnett. I think he was from Louisiana. He used to have a style where he would stride and he would alternate with a boogie bass, walking bass. So I incorporated his style in it too. So Footloose.
Wow. So okay. So that's. I guess we're kind of telescoping back and forth in time between Scott Joplin and yourself in the 21st century. Some of the history between them. Now we still have some of these pictures.
Oh yeah.
That we refer to now. What do we got here?
Oh, that's Louis Chauvin.
This is Louis Chauvin.
Oh, another picture of Louis Chauvin.
Another Louis Chauvin.
This is a guy named Joe Jordan. He was a contemporary of Scott Joplin, but he was young too. All these guys were younger. They were all like young enough to be, he was about. Joe Jordan was about the same age as Louis Chauvin, the same age as Arthur Marshall. They were all like born in the early 1880s. Where Scott Joplin was born in 1867. So he was a popular writer. I played one of his pieces, but I don't, may not have time for it. But he was the great writer. He was here in New York, and he wrote music for Ziegfeld Follies. In fact, it was Joe Jordan who put one of his songs, put Fanny Brice on the map. He wrote the song Lottie Joe in 1910, and that became a big hit, and that was Fanny Brice's first big hit on Broadway. And that made him a millionaire, Joe Jordan. And they talk about this building that he had made in Chicago called the Joe Jordan Building in 1916. It was called, I guess they nicknamed the house that Lovey Joe built because it made him very, very wealthy, that tune, yep. Let's see what we have here. That's Joe Jordan again at the piano. I can take that back, yeah, 1908, let's see.
It's Jelly Roll.
Oh, yeah. And so Joe Jordan, and then you have Jelly Roll Morton. And Jelly Roll Morton was at the beginning of when the music started transforming. It was always, like one lady told me from Sedalia, an old elder, she told me, she said, ragtime music, people tend to think that it was just stuck in one time. It was always moving forward. This was an elder black woman I know named Rose Nolan. She was a journalist in Sedalia newspaper. And she told me, she said the music was always moving forward. Black music always progresses and moves forward. So Jelly Roll Morton was one of those transitional musicians. He was really pushing the music forward. And he pushed it forward in a style called jazz, which was, he was in New Orleans, so he played that way. Joe Jordan was up in St. Louis, and he was pushing the music forward. Scott Joplin was in Missouri, and later he came to New York, and he was pushing the music forward as well. And I had an example that I wanted to give you of, for those who don't know, Scott Joplin, you heard The Entertainer. That's 1902. That was like top of the line, cutting edge ragtime for that time period. Everything Scott Joplin wrote was cutting edge, But in 1909, he wrote a piece called Euphonic Sounds. And euphonic sounds, James P. Johnson was talking about euphonic sounds in the 1940s. He said, you take a piece like euphonic sounds. He said, who really understands it? He said, euphonic sounds was way ahead of his time, Here go euphonic sounds. Scott Joplin breaks away from the typical oompa left hand, and he does something else. Anyway, you get the idea. You get the idea. He was somewhere up there. I mean, he really studied the classics. He understood Mozart. He understood Beethoven. You really can tell he was listening to the masters that came before. So he was always, when he wrote something, it was always on another level from the typical stuff that was coming out. That's what made him the king of ragtime writers.
Now, when he came to New York, he was working on an opera,
Yes.
Treemonisha.
Treemonisha, yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about Treemonisha?
Well, Treemonisha was, I guess, it really, honestly, looking at the story of Treemonisha, Scott Joplin kind of masked, it was a lot of things that he wanted to express about that he didn't like, things that he saw that was injustices, and was really called for African American people to wake up and become, lean in the direction of education, and things that he saw that he seen coming up as a child in Texarkana, because the story is set near Texarkana, and he's hiding behind Treemonisha's character. That's really Scott Joplin, and there's a song called "Superstition," where he talks about the things. So obviously, Scott Joplin saw these things coming up about superstitions, and people, older people, they had these things about not don't sweep my foot with the broom, and this kind of thing like that. It's like it's really serious. So he wanted to talk about that kind of thing, and moving and abandoning that way of thinking and moving towards education. So Treemonisha was one who had been educated by a white lady, and they was on the plantation, her and her father Ned and Monisha, and I could tell you the whole story, but anyway, there's one song and I figured this out. Nobody had thought about it, and I mentioned this, something I detected in Treemonisha. There's one song, and I marked this because this is something I'm saying. Nobody didn't put this in any books anywhere. I'm saying this. There's a protest song in Treemonisha. It's called "When Villains Ramble Far and Near." And so obviously Scott Joplin was down in Texarkana, and he's seen things like lynchings, and I said, because I'm looking at it, I analyzed the song, I said, this has nothing to do with Zaza Trick and Ludud, the two villains, the two conjurers in the opera. The song, if you listen to the lyrics, it's like, it has nothing to do with it. It's like it's something about when villains ramble far and near, to treat other people bad, or you can hear them rambling in the distance, and we keep a brilliant light when villains ramble far and near. I said, that doesn't sound like Zaza Trick and Ludud. They was just like some conjurers trying to sell superstitious, bags of luck and all this kind of stuff, I said, why would they have to, people, have to keep a light on outside and all this type of stuff? So anyway, it was a protest song about the, about the Klan, and he was clever because Scott Joplin he masked a lot of things in his opera, Treemonisha. But anyway, I could go on.
I think that we're running close to time, but why don't we open up for a few questions, shall we? Are there any questions in the audience? Yes. Okay, we have one right here down in the middle. Okay, I think we need to, there's a mic in the back. I think if you could go to if you could go to.
You know what, this mic, is it on? You can use this mic, because I have a. Oh, okay, sure.
Okay. Yes.
Yes, I have a two-part question, if you'll indulge me. I'd like to know, what do you think is the greatest myth about Scott Joplin? And secondly, what is the global impact of ragtime today?
The greatest myth of Scott Joplin? Wow. That he was stuck in one place, musically. I don't think so. I think that he was always moving forward. You could hear it. I mean, you could hear his music was moving forward. And let's see, is that the greatest myth that I've heard? Yeah, I think so. He was actually, I'll tell you, Scott Joplin was actually, he was one of these guys. He was what they call a race man. He was really pushing for the advancement of African American people. His wife mentioned him. She said he was like Dr. Martin Luther King. She mentioned this in the 1940s, like 1947. She did an interview in a magazine called The Record Changer, and she said that he was really strong on the thought of uplifting the race. He had Scott Joplin had actually. I was reading the new book by Edward Berlin in second edition, and he did some research on Scott Joplin and found out that he actually had started his own branch of the Republican Party. And it was different back then, of course, Republican Party. So he really wants some things to change, and he was just Scott Joplin. But the greatest myth, as I'll say, is that I think that they think people tend to think that his music he was stuck back then. He was not like Jelly Roll Morton. He wasn't pushing the music forward. But Louis Armstrong said in an interview, he said that all the things that Jelly Roll Morton was doing, he took those ideas from Scott Joplin. This is what Louis Armstrong said. Yeah, he took those things from the Spanish tinge, Solace. He did that in 1909. So, but I'm not saying that Jelly Roll Morton wasn't original, because he really was advancing the music and pushing it forward. I had one Jelly Roll Morton piece I was gonna play with. I won't play it now. Hit it. Well, this is I'll play a little bit one of his Spanish tinge tunes. He called it the Spanish tinge. This is a piece called Mama Anita, which was named for his wife Anita Gonzalez, 1923. Thank you.
Any more questions? There's another question over there, yes.
Actually, this is one for each of you. You mentioned a book written in the late 1800s by a brother. I wanted to get the title of that book.
Yes, it's entitled, I want to get it exactly right, Music and Some Highly Musical People by James M. Trotter.
James M.
Trotter, Trotter. Okay. Yeah, it's.
I'm sorry. I want you to finish that, because I didn't answer the gentleman's other question.
That was a two-part question, right?
Yeah.
But it was James and Trotter. He had been a slave, and he also had. There's a fascinating story just about the Trotter family, because his son was an activist up in Boston as well. James M. Trotter, some music and some highly musical people.
And the other question was, why did you mentioned you're not playing Solace anymore?
Oh, I compose my own music, so.
Well, I get that. But
yeah.
Could you play a little bit of it?
I don't play it. I don't really play them. I can't play it anymore. Yeah. So I don't know it anymore. So, but I write pieces like this, so. So, I'm composing my own music. Yes. Thank you. Yeah. Oh, and
You wanted to answer the second
the
part
impact
of
of
the question.
today,
Impact.
ragtime on music today. Was it more so what you were asking, the impact on today's music? Globally? Well, I think that we wouldn't have all the styles that developed afterward if it wasn't for ragtime, because they laid down the foundation of the rhythm, and they're still using it today. I've found traces of ragtime. Well, it's all the same thing. It's like one musician said in 1956, a guy named Glover Compton. He said that it's all one and the same thing. Ragtime, jazz, swing is all the same thing. He said just change the names as the time moves forward. He said, but it's all either two to the bar or four, and it's a syncopated rhythm over the top. And you find that in hip hop. Hip hop is the same thing. It's all ragtime, all of it. I mean, it's all like the music I was talking about from Mali. It's like it's all the same thing. It's a thread, and it's just a even against uneven. Yeah, but the impact on today's music, I don't know. I guess we still have people playing ragtime, but it's like it's in a little isolated bubble, So I think they'd be like back in 1900 or somewhere back there. So, yeah. I hope I answered your question. Yes.
One more.
Yes, sir. Were the ragtime composers competing with or benefiting from the player pianos?
No. Well, Duke Ellington did. Duke Ellington they all play, all these guys play ragtime. Fats Waller, but Duke Ellington specifically was interviewed, and he said how he learned how to play very well. He learned from listening to, and he owned his mother, I think she owned a player piano, and he listened to James P. Johnson's Charleston, Carolina Shout. And he learned how to play. That was the test piece here in New York. It was Carolina Shout. And he said, if you couldn't play Carolina Shout, then you couldn't play. So he learned how to play Carolina Shout from listening to piano rolls.
Well,
He said,
really asking, I guess, the economic question.
Yes.
Were they competing with the piano players, the player pianos, or did they get money from those roles? And
the better players could. Scott Joplin made a few in the end of his life, like about 6 months before he died. He made several piano rolls. But a lot of those musicians, the better people like James P. Johnson, they recorded like hundreds of rolls. Fats Waller, U.B. Blake. I guess they got paid pretty good. Yeah.
thanks.
Yes.
But can you?
Yes.
Do we have
Yes,
any
question.
more questions?
Yes.
Have people come to you for lessons?
Have people come to me for lessons? Yeah, a few people have, but that's rare. Usually a student, they'll come, they want to learn how to play one song, one ragtime piece, and I'll teach them how to play it. So.
But because you self-taught yourself, I think you would investigate further and deeper than if you had lessons.
Yeah.
And I would imagine people would like to learn the way you do.
Yeah. I don't know. I have to create that interest or something, or find somebody who's interested, a student who would be interested in studying and learning more about it. Yes.
On that note, can you
Yeah.
play us another one of your rags?
Sure.
right quick?
Rag. Let's see.
Which one would you like to entrance us with?
You know what? I'm gonna try to play this tune. So if I mess it up, I done told you ahead of time. This is a brand new piece. I call it One Step Beyond, and it was written in dedication to James Reese Europe, and I premiered it in November in Chicago. It's a one step because James Reese Europe, he and W.C. Handy were pretty much the inventors of the one step. So I'll try to get through this thing. It's new, so.
Thank you so very much, Reginald Robinson, as well as Tyehimba Jess. Thank you to these two Chicago boys in these caps. As I mentioned earlier, Reginald will be signing his CDs and have them for sale outside in the Langston Hughes lobby if you want to continue to converse with him, as well as I suggest picking up Tyehimba's book, Olio. With that, have a good evening.